By the 1990s, the curse began affecting towns far beyond Runa Hollow's buried valley. People started reporting shadows that moved with the wrong timing, lagging behind instead of staying attached. A shopkeeper in a nearby village noticed that when she raised her hand, her shadow followed half a second later. Another reported seeing his shadow turn its head before he did. A young man claimed his shadow smiled. At first authorities thought it was mass hysteria, but then photographs captured these anomalies. In one photo, a family posed for a picture, smiling brightly. Their shadows stood behind them, not mimicking the pose, but facing the photographer directly. Experts tried to debunk it for years. They never succeeded. In 2004, a 52-year-old man named Terence Ward was riding a late-night bus through the mountain pass. The bus was mostly empty. Only 3 passengers sat quietly. As the bus entered a foggy stretch of road, Terence noticed someone sit next to him without the sound of footsteps. He turned and froze. It was himself. Same face. Same clothes. But the double's skin was pale and damp, like it had just climbed out from under the earth. The double stared into Terence's eyes and said, "You've lived enough. Go sleep." Terence screamed and the bus driver slammed the brakes. The passengers saw no one beside him. But Terence swore he saw the double step off the bus and stand in the fog, watching him leave. Terence was found dead in his home a week later, no signs of struggle. Except one. The mirror in his bedroom had 2 perfect handprints on the inside of the glass. Between 2008 and 2015, reports of doppelganger sightings surged across multiple regions around the mountains. People saw themselves standing on roadsides, staring from hilltops, reflected in windows where they should not appear. In every case, witnesses described the same feature. The doubles had empty expressions, as if observing the world for the first time. They never spoke. Never approached. Never blinked. But they always appeared at dusk, when the light was too dim to see clearly yet too bright to ignore. Scientists, unable to explain the phenomenon, blamed stress and hallucinations. Locals knew better. They said the veil was thinning again. In 2016, a university paranormal research team conducted thermal scans near the buried valley. What they found terrified them. Under the earth, dozens, or maybe hundreds, of shapes were detected. Human-sized. Upright. Still. But the heat signatures were inverted. Where a living human would show warmth, these figures showed cold cores surrounded by faint halos of heat, like frost radiating outward. One student fainted when she saw that the figures were arranged in rows. As if lined up. As if waiting. She recovered only to whisper. They were facing upward. They're watching the surface. The project was shut down the next morning. All data was confiscated. The team was ordered to never speak of it again. Most of them didn't. One did. And she vanished 2 months later. Her apartment was left untouched except for her mirror, which was shattered outward. After the third king died the same way, fear no longer lived only in the shadows. It stood openly beside every villager, walked through every street, and slept beside every child. No one could pretend anymore that the deaths were accidents. No one could deny that something inside the castle was choosing each king's final moment. The kingdom began to change in a way that could be felt in every breath. People walked faster, spoke more softly, and watched the hill with nervous eyes. Even the strongest soldiers avoided looking at the highest tower of the castle at night, because they said a faint glow sometimes appeared there, like a single lantern moving slowly across the stones, though no one lived in that tower anymore. Mothers told their children never to speak the names of the dead kings inside their homes. Farmers refused to work the fields closest to the castle, claiming the soil made their tools vibrate as if the ground itself hummed. Travelers from other lands approached the kingdom with caution, staying only long enough to rest their horses before leaving again. They said the air tasted different here, older, colder, like it carried secrets that had been buried for centuries but wanted to rise. Even the animals seemed changed, moving quietly and keeping their distance. Dogs barked at the castle at night, then whimpered and retreated, tails tucked between their legs. The royal council did everything in its power to stop the spread of fear. They told people the kings had died from a rare sickness. They arrested those who spoke too loudly about a curse. They ordered soldiers to stand guard around the base of the hill, as if swords could stop something invisible. But the council could not protect themselves from the truth. At night, even the bravest among them felt watched. Some stopped sleeping inside the castle walls, claiming they heard footsteps when no one was near. Others reported seeing their breath turn white in warm rooms or feeling invisible fingers brush against their hair. The castle had become a place where no one wanted to stay, yet it remained the throne's home because no one dared move it. The king's seat was a symbol of power. Abandoning it would mean admitting weakness. And so the curse remained unchallenged. The line of kings continued because the kingdom needed leadership. The people needed laws, protection, and order. But now, every prince knew what awaited him. When a boy was born into the royal family, the joy of his birth was always mixed with quiet grief. Some mothers cried softly when holding their newborn sons, not because they were sad to have them, but because they knew those sons would one day grow into kings who would walk into the castle's cold embrace and likely never walk out alive. The castle did not care about childhood innocence. It did not care about hope. It cared only about the bloodline and the pattern it had claimed. For the first time in history, some royal family members fled the kingdom. They married into distant lands and never returned. But those who stayed behind were trapped by duty, tradition, and fear. And the castle watched them all with silent hunger, waiting for the next king to take the throne and follow the path carved by those before him. King Herod was not like his brothers or uncles before him. When he rose to power, he carried a strange mix of calmness and determination. He did not pretend the curse was a lie, but neither did he let it rule him. Herod believed the only way to survive was to understand the truth. He believed that knowledge could cut through fear if he learned enough. And so, from the first day of his reign, he began a search that no other king had dared to attempt. He wanted to know why every king died the same way. He wanted to know what lived inside the castle walls. He wanted to know what truly happened on the night his ancestor Aldrich placed the first stone on the hill. Herod spent hours in the royal archives, reading old scrolls and maps with torn edges and faded ink. Many spoke of the hill before the castle existed. They described it as a sacred place where ancient tribes once gathered to perform rituals under the full moon. Some writings claimed the hill was a resting place for an ancient guardian spirit meant to protect the land. Others said it was the final home of a powerful sorcerer whose anger was sealed within the earth. Some scrolls told stories of offerings left at the top of the hill, offerings meant to keep something asleep beneath the soil. None of these stories agreed with one another, but they all carried the same warning: the hill was not meant to be disturbed. Herod did not stop with old scrolls. He brought in wise men, priests, and scholars from distant lands. They studied the castle stones and walked through every hallway, feeling the coldness that lived inside the walls. Some believed the curse came from the land itself. Others thought something dark entered the castle during a storm years ago. A few whispered that a spirit lived inside the castle, and every king who wore the crown became tied to it. But even with all their knowledge, no one could explain why each king died in the same way. No one could explain the invisible hands that squeezed their throats. No one could explain the frozen terror on their faces. The more Herod searched, the more the castle seemed to notice. The whispers around him grew louder. The shadows near his door stretched farther. Some nights he felt his bed dip slightly, as if someone invisible had sat beside him. He kept a candle burning at all hours, but the flame often bent sideways, as if pushed by a breath he could not see. Servants begged him to stop his search, claiming the castle did not like being questioned. But Herod continued anyway, believing the only way to survive was to be brave enough to understand. Yet courage cannot stop a curse that has waited for centuries. One night, as Herod studied a map of the hill, the candles blew out without warning. The room grew cold. Herod felt a presence behind him. He turned slowly, heart pounding, breath shaking. And though he saw nothing, he felt fingers brush against his throat. He tried to run. He tried to shout. But the invisible grip tightened, stronger and colder with every second. By dawn, the guards found him just as they had found the kings before him, lying on the floor, fingers clutching his own throat, eyes wide with terror. Harald had searched for answers all his life. In the end, only the castle knew the truth. After King Harald's death, the kingdom changed again. The council no longer bothered to hide the truth. They could not cover up a curse that had taken for kings in the same horrifying way. Instead, they tried to use fear to control the people. They declared the castle sacred, claiming no one should question its power. They warned that anyone who challenged the royal traditions would bring misfortune to the entire land. People obeyed because fear can shape a kingdom more strongly than any army can. But fear also weakens. Farmers worked slower, merchants hesitated to travel, and soldiers refused to serve on the upper floors of the castle. Even the bravest knights avoided the king's chambers unless absolutely necessary. The castle stood tall and silent on its hill, but its presence felt like a cloud hanging over the kingdom. At night, people thought they heard distant cries carried by the wind. Some claimed they saw faint lights moving through the castle windows even though many rooms had been sealed for years. Crowns, once symbols of honor, now felt like chains. Each prince who learned he would one day be king felt the weight of future death settle on his shoulders. And the people learned to look at their rulers not with admiration, but with quiet sorrow, knowing none of them would rule for long. The castle demanded each king, and the kingdom had no power to refuse. But the story of the cursed castle was far from finished. The darkest chapters were still ahead. When the next heir, Prince Elric, came of age, everyone in the kingdom expected him to fear the throne more than anything. But Elric was different. He did not fear the curse, he hated it. From childhood, he watched the council bow to fear, watched servants tremble in hallways, watched people look at the castle with dread instead of pride. Elric grew up angry that a building, a collection of stones and shadows, had more control over the kingdom than any living king. And so, when his time came to wear the crown, he made a choice that no ruler before him dared to consider. He refused to live in the castle. Elric announced he would rule from a new palace he planned to build on the far side of the kingdom, far from the cursed hill. The council panicked. They told him the people would see him as weak. They warned him that abandoning the historic seat of power would break tradition. But Elric refused to listen. He believed a king should not obey fear. He believed the curse would die if he moved away from its reach. And so, for the first time in centuries, the throne room went dark. The royal banners hung untouched. The great halls, once filled with music and footsteps, fell silent. The castle seemed to watch the prince pack his belongings with a cold, unmoving stare. Some servants cheered quietly, believing the long nightmare might finally end. Others whispered that the castle would not allow this. They said its hunger was too old, too deep. And they were right. The night before Elric planned to leave, a storm rose like none the kingdom had ever seen. Lightning struck the hilltop again and again, lighting up the dark towers in violent flashes. The winds howled around the castle, pushing against the walls until they creaked. Some said they saw a shape in the tallest window, a shadow standing still while the storm raged around it. Others claimed they heard a scream, not human, carried across the wind. Elric ordered the gates open so he and his soldiers could ride away despite the storm. But when he approached the great wooden doors, they would not budge. The hinges groaned. The metal bindings stretched. But the gates stayed shut, held by something no one could see. The soldiers pushed with all their strength, but the doors felt like they were locked from the inside by a giant hand. Elric refused to give up. He turned toward the side passages, only to find those doors stuck as well. Every exit was sealed. Every hallway felt tighter. Every torch dimmed. The castle was not bricks and stone anymore, it was a living thing closing its jaws. That night, Elric and his guards camped in the main hall, weapons ready, waiting for dawn. But dawn did not save them. When the sun rose, the guards found the young king lying on the cold stone floor. His hands were wrapped around his throat. His eyes stared upward in absolute terror. He had never even slept in the royal chamber. He never sat on the throne. He never ruled from the castle. Yet the curse found him anyway. He had tried to escape, but the castle showed him the truth: no king could run from its reach. No king would ever break the pattern. The moment Elric died, the great wooden doors swung open easily, as if nothing had happened. As if the castle wanted everyone to know escape was impossible. After Elric's failed escape, the kingdom learned a painful truth. The castle was not just cursed. It was in control. It decided who lived, who died, and when. The council no longer argued about traditions or appearances. They accepted what generations had feared: every king was bound to the castle from the moment he accepted the crown. So a new law was created, one that said every king must live in the castle for at least one night after his coronation. Most people believed the law was created by the council. But in whispered conversations, many said the law was made by the castle itself. The old stories claimed the shadow inside the stone walls needed to witness the rise of every king. It needed to know the face it would someday take. Some said it claimed the kings so it could feed on their fear. Others believed it wanted something deeper, something tied to the first king, Aldrich, who had disturbed its ancient home. Either way, no king could avoid the castle now. Princes grew up knowing that their coronation was not a celebration of power, but a countdown to their death. Some tried to delay their rise, giving duties to advisors and pretending they were unready. But eventually, the crown always found them. And when it did, the castle waited. The people of the kingdom changed as well. Weddings near the hill became rare. Children no longer played close to the forest. A simple gust of cold wind was enough to make a family lock their doors. Even sunlight did little to ease the fear that covered the land like a heavy blanket. When villagers looked toward the castle in the distance, they could almost feel the weight of the curse pressing on their backs. Generations passed. Kings rose and fell. And each death repeated the same terrible shape: hands on the throat, eyes wide open, fear frozen in place. The kingdom survived, but it did so under a dark cloud that never lifted. People said the castle kept count, that it remembered every face, every scream, every final breath. And the stone walls, darker now than when they were first laid, never changed, as if they carried the fear inside them. The castle had become more than a building. It had become a legend, a warning, a hunger. By late November of 1783, the village of Runa Hollow had changed beyond recognition. Snow began falling weeks earlier than expected, blanketing the crooked roofs and silencing the once busy paths. The cold was not natural. People swore it shimmered with a strange stillness, as if the air waited for something or someone. Those who remained alive walked quickly, heads low, avoiding windows, mirrors, and puddles. Even polished pots were turned face down. The curse had grown so strong that any reflective surface could reveal the second face. Widows and widowers now outnumbered families. Livestock refused to graze near the eastern woods. A young boy, Thomas, reported seeing two identical horses, one real, one ghost pale, standing side by side in the stable. The ghost one vanished when his mother looked but left the real horse trembling so hard it collapsed minutes later. The villagers whispered. The village is splitting in two, the living and their shadows. No one dared ask which world was meant to survive. On the night of December 3rd, the church bell began ringing. No one was there to pull the rope. The remaining villagers awoke in terror. They scrambled to their doors, but every lock slid shut on its own. Windows frosted instantly from the inside. People felt watched. The bell rang 12 times, then stopped. A silence followed, deeper than anything they had heard before. Even the wind halted, as if listening. Then came the sound. A group of footsteps. Slow. Synchronized. Approaching from the eastern road. Father Merrow peeked through a crack in his shutter. What he saw ended his sanity. Every villager's doppelganger, dozens of them, were walking in perfect unison toward the town square. They did not breathe. Did not blink. Did not turn their heads. Pure reflections of the living, but slightly darker. Like versions pulled from somewhere where warmth did not exist. Father Mero recorded one detail in his trembling handwriting. Their skin looked like candle wax left in the cold. Their eyes were pits of water, reflecting only the viewer. I could not see their thoughts, only myself drowning in them. Some villagers fainted. Others prayed. Others tried to scream but found their voices gone. The doppelgangers reached the church door. Then, every single one lifted its hand and placed its palm against the wood. The door charred black under their touch. The first queen to rule the cursed castle arrived with a heart full of fire and a mind that refused to bend. She had grown up hearing the same stories as everyone else, stories of kings who died the same way, stories of shadows that walked when no one was looking, stories of a curse older than memory. But she never believed them. She thought fear made people small, and she had spent her whole life fighting against it. When she became queen, many people whispered that the curse would finally meet someone strong enough to break it. She believed this too. She thought she would be different, that the curse only won because the kings before her let it. She walked into the castle with her head high, promising herself she would not fall to a story. At first, everything seemed normal. The castle felt quiet but not threatening. The hall stretched endlessly, but she did not feel watched. She moved through the rooms with confidence, touching the old stones with wonder instead of fear. She believed the curse was only a tale kept alive by frightened minds. But the castle is patient with the proud. It does not strike quickly. It listens, it waits, and then it whispers. The queen began to notice small things at first. When she woke up, her shoes were sometimes moved from where she placed them. The curtains in her chamber seemed to sway even when the windows were shut. And sometimes, when she walked alone, she heard footsteps that matched her pace until she stopped. Then they stopped too. Still, she refused to fear. She believed fear gave the castle power. But one evening, as she passed through a long hallway, she heard a soft whisper follow her. At first it sounded like wind slipping through cracks in the wall. But the whisper shaped itself into words. It said her name. Just once. Just gentle. She froze, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. She touched the wall where the sound came from and felt a vibration, like something breathing on the other side. She asked the guards to break open that section of the wall, convinced that maybe someone had hidden inside. The stones were smashed apart, layer after layer, until the wall was nothing but rubble. But behind it was only more stone, dark and cold, untouched for centuries. No openings. No tunnels. No place for a voice to hide. That night she could not sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for the whisper. It came again. Softer this time, like a memory trying to form. It said her name once more, but after that came another sound, a faint tapping, almost like someone drumming their fingers in a slow, patient rhythm. It came from the wall near her bed, from inside the stone. She pressed her ear against it and listened. Tap. Pause. Tap. Pause. Tap. The rhythm felt like someone thinking. Someone waiting. She stepped back, shaken for the first time. She realized the castle did not need darkness to frighten her. It only needed patience. In the days that followed, the whispers grew stronger. Some called her name. Others repeated words she had spoken earlier that day. Once, she heard the walls repeat a sentence she had whispered to herself hours earlier, a secret she had never shared with anyone. That was the moment she understood that the castle was not just cursed, it was alive in ways no human could understand. It listened to every breath. It learned the voice of every ruler. It carried their words inside its stone veins, and it released them like echoes of minds that were no longer alive. Determined not to be defeated, the queen searched the castle from top to bottom, looking for clues. She walked every hallway, climbed every tower, explored every forgotten chamber. She discovered murals painted by ancient hands, showing rulers standing before walls that seemed to speak. She found carvings hidden behind broken tiles, showing twisted faces trapped inside stone, their mouths open in silent screams. She found old journals left by kings who had heard the same whispers but had been too afraid to write about them clearly. Only one journal contained a full confession from a ruler who claimed the walls repeated his deepest regrets aloud every night until he lost the strength to live. The queen tried to confront the curse directly. She stood in her chambers and spoke into the walls, challenging whatever hid inside them. She demanded it show itself. She demanded it explain the deaths. At first the walls were silent. Then, slowly, a voice answered, not with words, but with her own voice repeated back to her, twisted into something darker, colder, deeper. It spoke her own thoughts back to her, but they sounded like they belonged to someone who hated her. She stepped back, horrified, realizing she was not alone in that room. Something inside the stone was learning her voice, shaping it, preparing it. Over time, the whispers changed. They began to speak without copying her. They spoke warnings, regrets, and sometimes terrible predictions. They told her she would die exactly as the kings had died. They described the place where it would happen. They mentioned the expression she would wear. They whispered all of this in calm, steady tones, as if discussing the weather. She pressed her hands against her ears, but the whispers grew louder inside her mind. She ordered workers to tear apart the room where the whispers were strongest, but every time a stone was removed, another whisper appeared behind the next layer. Soon the queen began losing sleep. The sounds inside the walls followed her everywhere. Even during celebrations, she heard soft whispers behind the music. Even during council meetings, she heard the tapping rhythm under the table. Even when she tried to bathe in silence, she heard her own name move through the steam like a ghost trying to breathe her thoughts. People began to notice that she looked tired and pale. Her hands shook when she signed documents. Her voice cracked when she spoke. She felt the castle learning her despair, repeating it back to her in tiny whispers until they sounded like truth. On her final night, she stood in front of the throne, staring at it as though it were a living enemy. She whispered to herself, saying she would not die like the others. But the walls whispered back, saying she already was. When dawn came, the guards found her in the same place where every king had died before her. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the walls as if she had finally seen the face hidden inside them. And on those walls, faint and fresh, were new cracks shaped like lines of writing. No one could read them, but everyone felt that the stone had swallowed her last words and carved them into itself forever. There are places in this world where time feels heavy, where the air moves slowly, where the walls remember more than the people who walk past them. But there is one place where the past does not only whisper, it screams. High on a lonely hill surrounded by forests that never seem to end, there stands a castle that people feared long before they ever gave it a name. It is a place where power rose and fell, where crowns changed hands, but where one thing stayed the same for almost 500 years. Every king who ruled from this castle died the same way. Not one escaped. Not one found peace. It was as if the castle itself decided how their final breath would leave their body. Travelers avoided it. Villagers lowered their voices whenever they spoke of it. Even soldiers who guarded its gates never slept well, because they said the walls watched them back. This is the story of that castle, the men who ruled it, the curse that shaped it, and the dark shadow that lived inside it longer than any king ever could. The story does not begin with a king, but with fear. Old villagers tell that on the night the castle's first stone was laid, the sky turned black even though no storm was coming. Animals hid, babies cried, and the workers who lifted those first stones felt a strange coldness crawl across their skin. Some said it was only the wind. Others said it was something else. No one agreed on what happened that night, but everyone agreed on one thing: whatever touched the castle that night never left. The people who lived near the hill watched it rise piece by piece, like a great beast growing from the ground. And even before the first king stepped inside, the people already whispered that nothing good would come from this place. Yet kings went there because power often grows where danger sleeps. And this castle promised both. It promised control of the land. It promised strength. It promised a future. But what it really held was a dark pattern that would repeat for centuries. A pattern of kings rising strong and dying in the same terrible way. Their power could not save them. Their armies could not protect them. Their sons and grandsons followed them into the same fate. And even now, long after the last king fell, people still walk around the ruins and feel uneasy, as if someone is standing close behind them even when no one is there. This is not just a story about kings. It is a story about fear that passed from father to son, a story about secrets hidden in stone, a story about a place that learned how to kill. Before the castle existed, the hill was a forbidden place. The villagers called it the Hill of Echoes because sounds behaved strangely there. When someone spoke, their voice sometimes came back to them twisted or delayed, as if someone unseen was repeating their words. Children were warned not to play near it. Hunters refused to track animals across it. Even wild creatures kept their distance, as if they knew something humans did not. This strange hill became the chosen place for a king named Aldrich, a leader who wanted his name to be remembered forever. Aldrich believed the hill was a sign from the heavens, a place meant for greatness. But the people believed something very different. There were stories of a spirit that roamed the hill, a shadow older than any kingdom. The villagers said this spirit did not like to be disturbed, and once awakened, it would follow the bloodline of whoever angered it. King Aldrich laughed at these stories. He said fear was only for the weak. He believed he could tame any land, command any spirit, and break any curse. He did not know that curses are born from pride, and he carried more pride than any king before him. Aldrich ordered workers to clear the trees and flatten the land. As they dug into the soil, they found strange stones covered with lines that looked like scratches but felt warm to the touch. Some workers refused to continue. They said the stones whispered at night, saying things no human ear should hear. Aldrich punished them, calling them superstitious. But other workers heard the whispers too, and soon fear spread like a quiet sickness among them. Still, the king demanded the castle be built, and so it was. Stone by stone, wall by wall, it rose with a heavy and unnatural silence. The workers described the air inside the half-built walls as thick, as if it was trying to press them out. Some fainted without warning. Others heard footsteps behind them even though no one was there. And one worker, who climbed high to shape the battlements, fell to his death after screaming that something pushed him. No one saw this something, but after that, several workers left and never returned. By the time the castle was finished, King Aldrich believed he had created a masterpiece. The villagers, however, believed they had lost the hill forever. They said it no longer belonged to the earth or the sky. They said it belonged to the shadow. They warned that no good would ever come from staying in that castle. Aldrich ignored them. He moved in proudly, ready to rule. And within 1 year, he became the first king to die the same way all the rest would. His death would start a pattern so strange and terrifying that it would shape the kingdom for centuries. But in the beginning, no one knew. They only knew that the king who built the castle died with his eyes wide open, his face frozen in fear, and his hands clutching his throat as if something unseen had strangled him. The doctors said it was a sudden sickness. The villagers said it was the shadow. And the castle said nothing at all. The next ruler arrived already afraid. He had heard the stories not from advisors or books but from the guards who whispered late at night, from the servants who crossed themselves when passing certain halls, and from travelers who refused to stay near the castle after sunset. He knew he was stepping into a place where people vanished into silence, where kings died in the same way, with the same expression, in the same place. But unlike those who came before him, this king did not want to resist or understand the curse. He wanted to face it. He wanted to follow its footsteps, believing that if he traced its path backwards, he might find the moment where it pierced into the world. He believed every mystery left footprints, and he was willing to walk through the darkest corners of the castle to find them. From the first night, he noticed the echoes. They were not sounds of people walking, nor the whispers of the walls described by the queen before him. These were deeper, like thumps made by something heavy moving across old floors. Sometimes the echoes came from behind him even though no one was there. Sometimes they came from ahead, pulling him into hallways he had never walked before. The guards pretended not to hear them, but their eyes trembled. The king followed the echoes anyway, tracing them from room to room as if they were threads leading through a maze. Over time he discovered that the footsteps only appeared when he was alone. If even one guard followed him closely, the echo vanished completely. It almost felt shy, or perhaps protective, guiding him somewhere without letting others interfere. He began exploring the castle late at night, when everyone else slept, carrying only a lantern and a small dagger that he knew would not help him against any spirit. As he followed the footsteps deeper into forgotten places, he found rooms untouched by time, still filled with dust that fell like snow when he brushed against it. In one room, he found a child's toy carved from bone. In another, he found a door scratched by fingernails long since turned to dust. And in another room, he found a broken crown lying beside a shattered mirror, its pieces reflecting his face in strange angles that made him look older, sharper, and absolutely terrified. The footsteps always stopped before he entered each room, as if waiting to see whether he understood the meaning of each object left behind. In the daylight he acted like a normal king, hosting meetings, signing letters, and watching over the land. People believed the curse had no effect on him, because he seemed calm and sure of himself. But inside, he felt the castle pulling at him every hour. Even during the warm brightness of morning, he sensed something watching him from above the doorways, from the corners of the ceiling, from behind the tapestries. He knew the castle wanted him to follow the footsteps again each night, and he obeyed because the mystery called to him louder than fear ever could. One night, the footsteps led him into a narrow hallway he had never seen before. It was colder than the rest of the castle, and his breath came out in white clouds. The lantern flickered as if struggling to stay alive. The footsteps grew softer, almost hesitant, as if guiding him into a memory instead of a room. At the end of the hallway stood a door covered in dust so thick it looked like fur. When he pushed it open, a wave of cold air struck him so hard he almost dropped the lantern. Inside the room, the floor was covered in footprints. They were small and large, old and new, overlapping each other in messy patterns that spun in circles. He knelt down to touch them and felt a strange warmth beneath the cold layers of dust, as though hundreds of people had stood there not long ago. But he knew that room had been sealed for centuries. He studied the footprints for hours, tracing the shapes with trembling fingers. Some prints were made by bare feet, others by boots, others by something that did not look human at all. The shapes twisted at the edges, as if the feet that made them belonged to something that learned to walk by watching humans but never got it quite right. He realized then that the curse might not only haunt the rulers. It might take shape, walk the halls, and study the king the same way the king studied it. When he returned to his chambers, he found dirt on the floor that matched the dust from the sealed room. The footprints he followed had followed him back. From that night on, the footsteps no longer guided him. They chased him. They appeared behind him when he walked through the corridors. They echoed around him during meetings until he could barely hear his own voice. They circled him when he tried to sleep, tapping softly like someone pacing outside his bedroom door. He began losing strength. He began shaking during the simplest tasks. He began waking from dreams where something stood over him, holding its breath, waiting for him to open his eyes. But still he followed the footprints every night, even when fear crushed his chest. He believed the curse wanted to be understood. He believed it had led him too far to turn back. And so he pushed deeper than any ruler before him, finding rooms filled with objects that did not belong to any time period, objects from kings who lived long after others died, objects from people who should not have existed yet. The castle held not only the past, it held twisted reflections of the future, things that should not have been there, as if the curse could bend time the way wind bends branches. On his last night, he followed the footsteps into the throne room. The steps were loud now, heavy, steady, like something that no longer needed to hide. He walked to the center of the room, holding the lantern out in front of him. The footsteps moved closer, one after another, until they sounded only inches behind him. He whispered into the air, asking what it wanted. And for the first time, the footsteps stopped completely. The silence was so deep it felt like the entire castle was holding its breath. When the guards entered at dawn, they found him in the exact place where every ruler had died, with the lantern still burning at his side. His eyes were open wide, but unlike the others, he did not look afraid. He looked like someone who had followed something too far, someone who had seen the truth behind the footsteps and could not speak it aloud. And behind him on the floor were fresh footprints leading away, prints that were not his, prints that vanished as the guards watched them. The castle had moved its steps again, waiting for the next ruler to follow them. By the early 1800s, scholars tried to make sense of the Runa Hollow disappearances. One theory gained popularity among occult researchers: the mirror veil theory. It claimed that Runa Hollow was built over a naturally thin boundary between two parallel realms. The bright realm, the world of the living. The dim realm, a reflection world where every living being casts a second, incomplete existence. Most people never see the dim realm. But under certain conditions, trauma, astronomical events, extreme weather, these second selves could peek through the veil. One scholar wrote, "A doppelganger is not a copy of you. It is the remainder of you in the other realm. When the veil weakens, the remainder wants to become the whole." According to this theory, the deadlight that appeared in 1783 wasn't a curse, it was a tear in the veil. A tear that the doppelgangers used to walk through. And once they crossed. In 1812, nearly 30 years after Runa Hollow vanished, a 7-year-old girl named Tila wandered into the valley with her father. Her father later reported that she suddenly froze in the middle of the abandoned road and whispered, "Papa, why is there another me?" He turned and saw a child standing across the field. Same height. Same clothes. Same hair. But shadow pale. The double lifted its hand and pointed directly at Tila. Tila whispered, "She won't blink." Her father scooped her up and ran. As they left the valley, Tila looked back and said, "Papa, she's not gone. She's following us, but in the ground." She never slept properly again. At age 9, she drew a picture of the valley. Under the drawing, she wrote, "Their world is below ours like water under ice." She died at age 15. Her last diary entry said, "I hear footsteps under the floorboards." In 1890, the Royal Historical Society sent for investigators to Runa Hollow to compile a definitive report. Only 2 returned. Their official statement was short and heavily censored. "We recommend total prohibition of travel within 1 mile of the valley. The phenomenon is not geological, meteorological, or biological. Further inquiries risk contamination." But the uncensored version, never released publicly, was leaked decades later. In it, one investigator noted, "When we reached the central square, all 4 of us saw a figure leaning in the exact attitude of each of us. Each one repeating our posture with a 1-second delay." Another wrote, "Our breaths fogged outward. Theirs fogged inward. As though inhaling cold into a world with no warmth." The uncensored report ended with, "They are not trapped. They are waiting." In 1962, physicist Dr. Joran Halworth, known for studying electromagnetic anomalies, visited the region around the buried valley. He wanted to prove that the legends were nothing more than superstition. But on his second trip, he detected a strange phenomenon that defied every law he knew. His instruments recorded a constant, low-frequency hum beneath the earth. Not geological. Not mechanical. Not natural. The hum rose and fell at intervals almost identical to a human heartbeat. When Dr. Halworth amplified the signal, he made a chilling discovery. The pulse was not random. It matched the rhythm of a breathing pattern. He wrote in his field notes, "I am measuring the respiration of something large. Or many things breathing together. The ground itself inhales." When he returned home, he became obsessed with mirrors. He covered every reflective surface in his house with cloth. His wife said he stopped sleeping, claiming he would see someone standing behind him whenever he blinked. He vanished 3 months later. Police found claw-like streaks on the inside of his bathroom mirror, as if someone, or something, had tried to pull its way out. The mirror was cracked from the inside. In 1977, an 8-year-old girl named Lily Moran reported hearing whispers under her bed. Her parents assumed it was nightmares, but Lily insisted the voices were real. She said they were slow voices, like people trying to talk through thick water. At first she only heard her name. Then longer phrases. Her parents were alarmed when she said, "They keep asking who is the real me." Doctors dismissed it as childhood imagination until the day Lily pointed to the floor and whispered, "They want me to lie down so they can measure my shape." 2 weeks later, Lily disappeared from her room. The window was locked. The door was untouched. No signs of forced entry. But the wooden floorboards beneath her bed were cold, unnaturally cold, covered in a thin layer of frost that did not melt for hours. Her parents swear they heard her voice the next morning, coming from under the floor. In 1988, 3 hikers in the mountains filmed something eerie. While resting by a frozen stream near the landslide site, they recorded themselves chatting. When they replayed the footage later, they found something horrifying. They spoke in the video. Then, 2 seconds later, their own voices responded, but distorted, lower, and slightly out of sync. Like someone copying them. One hiker laughed nervously in the recording and said, "Okay, that's creepy." 2 seconds later, the echo voice whispered, "Creepy," but in a tone none of them had used. All 3 hikers fled the area immediately. One reported that as they ran, the sound of footsteps followed behind them. But the footsteps did not match their running pattern. They were slower, deliberate. As though whatever followed them was not running, but learning to walk. By January 1, 1784, travelers passing through the valley found the entire village abandoned. No bodies. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Every home was perfectly clean, as if waiting for its owners to return. The only strange detail. On every window, every surface, a faint human face was pressed into the frost. As if the glass had tried to remember who lived there. The curse had taken them all. Some say the villagers now walk the woods endlessly, their forms half real, unable to escape the reflection world they were forced into. Others believe their doubles, now fully alive, wander the countryside pretending to be the true versions. Because to this day, travelers sometimes meet strangers who look perfectly normal, speak normally, behave normally, but when they walk away. In early spring of 1784, long after Runa Hollow vanished, a royal cartographer named Edric Hale was sent to update the regional maps. The Crown had received complaints that several trade routes were being mysteriously avoided, and Hale, known for his rational mind, was asked to investigate. He kept a journal, recovered months later in a swamp 8 miles from the valley. His first entry about Runa Hollow read, "The village stands silent, as though paused mid-breath. Doors are open. Chairs are pulled out. I expected ruin or blood, but instead I found absence. Absence is always louder." As night fell, the cartographer camped near the main well. That's when the first anomaly occurred. He heard footsteps circling the well. Slow. Measured. Repeating the same pattern again and again. Hale called out, thinking it was a traveler. No answer. When he shined his lantern, the footsteps stopped. He noted. The sound was of boots on stone. The same weight, the same rhythm as my own walking. He packed his belongings immediately and left before dawn. He never reached the nearest town. 2 months later, a fisherman found his journal floating in the swamp water, pages soaked but legible. The last sentence, smeared but readable, said, "If the thing behind me steps when I step, breathes when I breathe, then I am not alone. And whatever walks with me is learning." His body was never discovered. For years after the disappearance, travelers reported a strange phenomenon when passing near Runa Hollow's valley. They called it the 2-second delay. When someone spoke aloud, a faint echo of their own voice would reply. Not instantly, but 2 seconds later. It wasn't a normal echo. It matched the speaker's tone too perfectly. It whispered back the exact same words, but softer, as if repeating from behind a wall. A merchant named Laura's described it like this. Imagine speaking to yourself from the other side of a frozen mirror. Some travelers even swore that the echo occasionally changed a single word in the sentence, as though correcting the speaker. One man reported saying, I should hurry. And the echo whispered, no, wait. He fled without looking back. The phenomenon stopped abruptly in 1791, the year a major landslide sealed the Eastern Road. What caused it to end remains a mystery. But some believe. The echoes left the valley. The following night the sky turned white. Not with snow. Not with lightning. But with deadlight, a phenomenon no villager had seen before. The light was neither bright nor dim. It simply existed, like an afterimage burned into the sky. It cast no shadows. It created no warmth. It only blurred everything it touched. Objects seemed doubled. Leaning trees overlapped slightly with ghost versions of themselves. Even the villagers saw faint outlines of their own movements trailing behind their bodies. As this spectral glow filled the valley, the doppelgangers lifted their faces toward it, as if receiving a silent command. That command changed everything. Because at that moment, the doppelgangers began learning how to speak. Not with voices, but with perfect imitations of the villagers' mouths moving, though no sound came out. A silent mimicry that froze the blood of anyone watching. It meant only one thing. They no longer needed to wait. The exchange was beginning. On December 12th, the curse escalated. One by one, the doppelgangers stood in front of the homes of their living versions. They waited, as if expecting the inhabitants to come outside. They were patient. Too patient. A father named Rowan tried to ignore his doppelganger, until he saw his own double begin reenacting his memories. Rowan watched from inside his home as his pale copy mimed. The exact way Rowan chopped wood. The way he hugged his daughter. The way he cried when his wife died last month. Then the copy took out an invisible knife, and reenacted the moment Rowan killed a wild boar 6 years earlier. Except this time it directed the invisible blade upward, toward the window where Rowan was watching. Rowan fled to the cellar. By sunrise, his door was open. His bed was empty. His doppelganger was gone. And no body was ever found. The villagers understood the truth then. The doppelgangers didn't kill. They replaced. If the villagers stayed inside, the copies waited. If the villagers fled, the copies followed. If the villagers hid, the copies searched. One by one, the living were exchanged. By late December, only 7 villagers remained. 7 against their own 7 shadows. The winter solstice of 1783 arrived like a blade. The deadlight in the sky brightened. The ground vibrated faintly. The snow turned reflective, creating thousands of tiny mirrors that showed thousands of tiny faces staring upward. That night, the last 7 villagers hid inside the church, the only building whose windows had been covered with thick tar and cloth. They formed a circle, clutching candles. Outside, they heard footsteps gathering. Not 7. Hundreds. Every soul who had already been replaced, every doppelganger born from the curse, now stood around the church in absolute silence. At midnight, the footsteps stopped. Then 3 knocks. Perfectly synchronized. On every wall of the church. The villagers began praying. One of them started crying. Another whispered, "Not again. God, not again." The church door bent inward. Not pushed. Pulled. From the inside. Something invisible tugged at the wood. The hinges groaned. Finally, the door burst open. And the doppelgangers walked in. But instead of attacking, they simply stood there, watching the candles burn. Then the flames began mimicking them, flickering in the exact movements the doppelgangers made. One by one, the candles went out. The villagers vanished in the darkness. And in their places, many kings died the same way, but one king, King Voron, broke the pattern, not by escaping the curse, but by falling apart before it could finish its work. Voron was terrified from the day he learned he would one day be king. He grew up watching the faces of the dead kings painted on the palace walls, each one frozen in fear. He heard servants whisper about the curse. He saw soldiers tremble when stepping inside the castle. And he hated the throne before he ever touched it. When his father died, Voron became king. But from the first moment he walked through the castle gates, something felt wrong. He swore the air felt thicker, heavier. He said the shadows moved when he blinked. He claimed he heard footsteps behind him that stopped every time he turned. He heard his name whispered from the dark corners of the hall. The castle had always been strange for others, but for Voron it was unbearable. He refused to sleep in the royal chamber. He slept in the kitchens, in the stables, in the old barracks, anywhere except the tower room where the kings always died. But the castle did not care where his body rested. The whispers followed him. The coldness wrapped around him. And the pressure on his throat tightened day by day, even though no one saw hands around his neck. Voron stopped eating. He stopped speaking. He stared at walls for hours, shaking. Servants found him crying in hallways, covering his neck with both hands as if protecting it from something unseen. He told the priests that he could feel something creeping inside his mind. He said the castle wanted him broken before it took him. Before long, Voron stopped recognizing his own advisors. He screamed at his reflection, claiming another face stared back at him. He tore tapestries off the walls because he believed eyes were sewn into the fabric. He clawed at the stone floors until his fingers bled. And then, one night, he died, but not the way the others did. He collapsed in the dining hall, hands clutching his head instead of his throat. His eyes were still open, but they were empty, drained of everything, as if the castle had taken not only his breath, but his mind long before his final moment. People said the shadow had grown impatient. They said it decided to twist him from the inside instead of waiting for the usual end. Others said Voron had simply gone mad. But the ones who lived closest to the castle believed something darker. The castle had learned new ways to break a king. The next ruler to sit on the cursed throne was not a warrior or a proud noble. He was a scholar, a quiet man with ink-stained fingers and eyes that always seemed to be searching for something that other people could not see. He never wanted to be king, but fate pushed him forward when his older brothers died in battles far from home. As soon as the crown touched his head, he felt a strange heaviness, as if the stones of the castle recognized him and wrapped his spirit in a cold grip. He tried to ignore it, believing that fear was a story shaped by imagination. But even a man who loved logic and truth could not deny the feeling that the castle breathed in the darkness, and that each breath was not his own. Unlike the kings before him, he did not try to run from the curse or act stronger than it. Instead, he tried to understand it. He spent long nights in the ancient library, reading scrolls so old that the letters faded like dust when touched. He studied the writings of kings who had come before him, and he found strange patterns in their words. Some kings wrote about voices that kept them awake. Some wrote about dreams that felt too real. Some wrote about doors that appeared suddenly, and shadows that moved when no one else was watching. And all of them, in their final days, wrote about the same feeling, a presence walking just behind them, silent and patient, as if waiting for the right moment. The Scholar King believed there must be an origin to the curse, a moment in time when everything changed. He searched through ancient records, letters, maps, and memories left behind by people long gone. The deeper he searched, the more he realized the castle's darkness did not begin with the kings. It began long before the throne existed, long before the kingdom rose, long before the walls were built. He found clues about a forgotten tribe that lived on the land centuries earlier, a tribe known for rituals that mixed devotion with fear. They believed that every leader must face their own reflection not in a mirror, but in the shape of a being created from their own mistakes. A shadow self. A copy. A second version of the person they feared they might become. When a leader could not defeat their second self, the tribe believed the land itself would punish them forever. The Scholar King felt chills reading this. He wondered if the curse was something the tribe had placed upon the land, not out of anger, but out of a desperate need to keep the balance between light and shadow. Perhaps every king who ruled after them inherited a role the tribe never intended for strangers. He began to suspect that the identical deaths were not just accidents or curses. They might have been rituals repeated by something that had survived long after the tribe disappeared. Something that understood the tribe's final belief that no ruler could truly lead unless they learned to face their own second self. As he researched further, strange things began to happen. His quills rolled off the table even when the air was still. Books opened to pages he never touched. Candles went out the moment he stepped into a new thought. He started waking up with ink on his hands even when he had not written anything. And sometimes, in the corner of his vision, he thought he saw someone standing near the library door, holding a book just like he did. Every time he turned his head, the figure vanished. At first he thought it was stress or exhaustion. But then he noticed something that made his heart freeze. Whenever he saw the figure, the candlelight behind him cast only one shadow on the wall, his own. The figure had none. One night, after endless hours of reading, he found a page that looked newer than the others, even though it had been bound inside a book from centuries ago. The ink was darker, the lines cleaner, the letters written with a steady hand. At the top of the page was a sentence that chilled him to his core. It read, "You are almost ready." He stared at the writing, feeling as though the paper was breathing beneath his fingertips. He searched the castle for someone who could have written it, but no one claimed the page. No one even believed it belonged to the book at all. The Scholar King carried the page with him everywhere, unable to decide if it was a warning or an invitation. One evening, as a storm echoed across the mountains, he returned to the library to continue his work. But when he lit his candle, he found a new book sitting in the center of the table. A book he had never seen before. Its cover was made of dark leather, and the edges were sealed with threads so old they looked like dried veins. When he opened it, his own handwriting stared back at him, describing moments from his life that he had never written down. Childhood memories. His first fear. His first failure. His secret doubts about becoming king. Each page revealed something only he knew, yet the ink did not belong to his hand. He felt watched. Observed. Read like the book itself. And when he reached the final page, his breath caught. At the bottom, in ink that looked wet and fresh, was a sketch of his face. But next to it was another face, almost the same, but twisted in tiny ways, darker around the eyes, sharper in the jaw, colder in expression. Below the two faces were 4 words that ended his courage, "Only one may remain." From that moment on, he sensed that his second self, the reflection born from the tribe's ancient belief, was no longer hiding. It walked the halls with him. It read the books he read. It learned him. It prepared for the moment they would meet face to face. He knew the curse was moving faster now, as if excited to reach its end. The scratching behind the walls followed him. Footsteps echoed in rooms he had just left. And sometimes, in the silence of early morning, he heard a voice that matched his own whisper through the darkness, telling him that knowledge could not save him. His final days were marked by a strange calm. He no longer searched for answers because he felt the answer approaching him. He knew the moment of meeting was close, and he understood the truth the tribe had feared long ago. Every ruler must face themselves, and most rulers lose. On the last night of his life, the guards heard him speaking softly to someone, even though he was alone inside his chambers. When they broke down the door at sunrise, they found him in the same place where every king had died. His eyes were open wide, filled not with fear but with a terrible understanding of the answer he had spent his life searching for. And in his hand was the dark leather book, open to a final page that none of the guards had ever seen before. A blank page, waiting for the next ruler's story to be written. King Aldric's death spread through the kingdom like a cold wind. People whispered about it in the markets, in small cottages, and around nighttime fires where flames flickered as if nervous. No one understood how a strong king, a man who rode horses into battle and lifted heavy shields with ease, could suddenly fall in his own chamber without a single mark on his body except the terrible shape of his fingers curled around his throat. The royal doctors searched for poison but found none. They searched for wounds but found nothing. They searched for signs of madness, but Aldric had spoken clearly hours before, shouting orders at his guards and scolding a servant for spilling water on the floor. Yet sometime during the night, something happened that left him staring at the ceiling with eyes wide and filled with terror, as if he had seen something no living man should see. The guards who found him swore that the air in the room felt colder than the rest of the castle, and one guard fainted when he stepped too close to the bed. It was not the sight of the dead king that frightened him. It was the feeling that someone else was still in the room, watching, waiting, breathing quietly in the shadows even though no one could be seen. After Aldrich's death, the castle hallways carried a strange calmness. People walked softly, as if loud footsteps might wake something. Servants refused to stay alone in any room, especially when night came. They said they heard whispers through the walls, like someone speaking through a thin layer of stone. When they tried to follow the sound, it always moved away. Guards who patrolled the upper floors claimed to hear slow footsteps behind them, but when they turned, the hall was empty. The thick stone walls, meant to protect the royal family, began to feel like they were breathing, tightening, and trapping the people inside. Aldrich's son, King Renla, tried to ignore the growing fear. He walked proudly through the halls, pretending nothing was wrong, but even he could not hide the way his hands shook when he touched the door to the room where his father died. He ordered it sealed, never to be used again. But sealing a door cannot seal a curse, and the darkness inside those walls did not stay trapped. The villagers outside the castle felt the shift as well. They said the forest grew darker around the hill, and animals that once came close for water now kept far away. Birds stopped nesting in the trees near the castle. The wind seemed to change direction, blowing always toward the village as if carrying whispers from the castle's high towers. At night, the villagers sometimes woke to the sound of a deep, echoing thud, as if something heavy had fallen inside the castle. But when morning came, the castle guard swore they heard nothing. This quiet fear spread through the kingdom, wrapping itself around the people like vines. The king tried to reassure everyone, but even he did not sleep well, for every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's face in the same frozen terror. King Renla promised himself he would be stronger than the shadow that haunted the castle. But the truth was that the shadow did not fear strength. It did not fear power. It only waited. King Renla stepped into his father's place with a heavy heart and an even heavier burden. Though he wore the crown, he felt like it weighed 10 times more than it should, as if the castle itself pushed it down on him. He tried to rule with confidence. He tried to show the people he was not afraid. Yet no matter how bravely he walked through the halls, he never walked without a companion, a soft whisper that curled around the corners and seemed to follow him everywhere. Some nights he woke gasping for air, unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching him sleep. He blamed stress. He blamed grief. But deep down, he knew the truth he refused to speak. The castle had fixed its gaze on him, just as it had on his father. Renla tried to brighten the castle by hosting grand feasts and inviting nobles from across the land. He hoped laughter and music would push away the fear. But during every feast, something strange happened. The candles flickered even though there was no wind. The shadows stretched long across the floor, reaching toward the guests like dark fingers. People who visited often left early, claiming they felt unwell or uneasy. One noblewoman fainted during dinner and later said she felt a cold hand touch her shoulder even though no one was behind her. Another man refused to drink his wine after seeing a reflection in his cup that wasn't his own. These moments spread whispers among the courts of surrounding lands. Some said the castle was haunted. Others said it was cursed. But no one could deny the strange heaviness that settled over everyone who crossed its gates. Renla worked hard to hide the fear, but the castle made sure he could not forget. Every night the same sound echoed through the halls, a soft tapping that moved from room to room. Guards followed it, but it always stayed just one corner ahead of them. Servants tried to ignore it, but they heard it even in their dreams. Renla began spending more hours in prayer, begging for protection, begging for peace, begging for an answer. But the castle's silence only grew louder. One night, while Renla sat in his private chamber, he heard a voice whisper his name. It was not loud. It was not angry. It was soft, like someone leaning close to his ear. He turned around quickly, but no one was there. The candles shook in their holders. A cold breath touched the back of his neck. He ran from the chamber and refused to return for days. Still, Renla tried to rule. He passed new laws, strengthened the guard, and worked to bring food to the villages during a harsh winter. But it did not matter how kind or brave he was. The castle's curse did not care about goodness. It cared only about the pattern it had begun. And on a cold night near the end of his 3rd year as king, Renla met the same fate as his father. His guards found him lying on the floor near the very door he had sealed. His fingers were locked tightly around his throat. His face was frozen in terror. His eyes were wide open, staring at something that had been inches from him but invisible to all others. When Renla died, fear spread faster than ever before. The villagers no longer whispered, they spoke openly about the curse. They said the castle demanded the life of every king who dared to rule from within its walls. They warned that the royal bloodline was doomed. Some said the only way to break the curse was to abandon the castle forever. But the royal council refused to listen. They believed leaving the castle would make the kingdom look weak. They believed fear was only a superstition. They believed the deaths were accidents, nothing more. And so they placed Renla's younger brother, King Malrek, on the throne. Malrek was different from the kings before him. He was not proud like Aldric or gentle like Renla. He was stubborn, fiery, and full of anger. When he heard villagers speak of the curse, he threatened to punish them. When servants trembled in the halls, he shouted at them for believing childish stories. Malrek believed the curse was an insult, a challenge, something that dared him to prove his strength. He refused to fear the castle. He walked through every dark hallway, touched every sealed door, and entered every room his brothers avoided. Some admired his bravery. Others whispered he was foolish. But Malrek believed he was the only king strong enough to break the pattern. Yet even he could not ignore the strange things that happened. One night, while sitting alone in his war chamber, he felt a deep rumbling from beneath the floor. He thought it was an earthquake, but the walls did not shake. Instead, the torches dimmed, and the room filled with a cold breath that lifted papers from the table. Malrek felt something move past him, something he could not see but felt deep in his bones. He reached for his sword, but his hand froze. His skin grew pale. A whisper curled around his ear, saying a word he could not understand. When it passed, he felt weak, as if something had drained part of him. More nights passed, and the castle grew bolder. Doors slammed on their own. Footsteps echoed in empty corridors. Malrek ordered priests to bless the castle. They prayed for hours, sprinkling holy water and chanting. But after they left, the stones of the castle absorbed the water slowly, as if drinking it, leaving the walls dry once again. The priests refused to return. Malrek tried to stay strong, but the dark pressure inside the castle grew heavier, pressing against his chest, his thoughts, his sleep. His dreams became strange. He saw faces twisted in fear. He heard screams. He saw the eyes of his father and brother staring at him, warning him. He woke every morning shaking, sweaty, and breathless. His anger turned into desperation. And finally, like the kings before him, the castle chose its moment. His body was found at dawn. His fingers locked around his throat. His eyes staring at the ceiling. His face frozen in horror. 3 kings. 3 identical deaths. The pattern was no longer a whisper. It was a truth. In January 1903, villagers in the surrounding mountains reported an eerie sight. A white shimmer glowing from the valley at night. Old travelers recognized it instantly. The deadlight had returned. This time, it seemed to pulse rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Animals ran from the region. Birds refused to fly over it. Even snow melted unnaturally fast near the old path into Runa Hollow. A shepherd claimed, "I saw 3 men walking in single file. They left no footprints. Behind them walked 3 darker shapes. Those one stepped in snow but made no sound." The deadlight vanished by dawn. That same week, 3 miners from a nearby village went missing. Their boots were found facing the valley. Their footprints ended abruptly mid-step. In 1927, a man walked into a tavern in Redstone Harbor claiming to be from Runa Hollow. He said his name was Kayla Voss, a name that matched one of the villagers who disappeared in 1783. He was perfectly healthy. His clothes were old-fashioned but clean. He looked human in every way. Except for two details. He cast no shadow. He asked for a glass of water, then stared at it without drinking, like he was waiting for the surface to move. A sailor asked how he survived the village curse. Kayla replied calmly, "I didn't survive. I crossed." When asked what that meant, he smiled faintly and said, "The second face is never finished with its first." Then he stood up, walked outside, and vanished into fog so thick that no one saw where he went. A week later, the tavern owner found something under the table where Kayla had sat. A handprint burned into the wood. But it wasn't a burn mark. It was frost. In 1953, a group of hikers entered the outskirts of the old Runa Hollow Valley. Only one returned, a woman named Ayla Bram. She was incoherent for days, mumbling about reflections walking on their own and laughter that came from beneath the earth. Before she died of hypothermia, despite being in a warm hospital room, she wrote a final message on a scrap of cloth. "They do not want to kill us. They want our place. They want our warmth. They want to be the first face." The valley collapsed in a massive landslide 2 weeks later, burying Runa Hollow forever. Or at least burying the version of it that belonged to our world. Locals whisper that the other version, the dim one, still stands beneath the earth, waiting for the day the veil thins again. Because every winter, when the air grows cold and still, some people swear they hear footsteps walking only 2 seconds behind their own. The 12th king to rule the Dark Castle was a man shaped by fear long before he ever saw the cursed stones. His mother had whispered stories to him when he was only a child, stories about the kings who died the same way, about the silent nights when the wind carried voices that were not alive, and about the throne that always took more than it gave. He grew up hearing that he might one day sit on that throne, and he grew up wishing he never would. When he finally became king, his coronation did not feel like joy. It felt like stepping into a storm everyone else could see but he could not escape. Still, he tried to act strong, because every king must act strong, even when the fear is breaking them inside. At first he tried to live differently from the kings before him. He slept in a different room, ate from different plates, and ordered every mirror in the castle to be covered. He never walked through the halls alone and never allowed a door to close completely behind him. Some people called him paranoid, but he did not care. He believed that the curse could be fooled if he changed all his habits. But the castle watched him with a patience older than any man. It waited while he changed beds and candles and guards. It waited while he tried to turn every shadow into light. It waited while he tried to outrun something that did not need to chase him. And then, slowly and quietly, the curse made its first move. For many nights he heard scratching sounds behind the stone walls, like something crawling through secret spaces no one knew existed. He tried to ignore them, but the sounds grew louder, clearer, and closer, until they seemed to come from inside his own room. Servants searched, guards searched, masons searched, but they found nothing. Yet the noise continued. When the king finally shouted into the empty darkness for the creature to show itself, the scratching stopped. That silence was even worse. Silence in the castle never meant peace. Silence meant something was choosing the next moment carefully. Not long after, the king discovered a door he had never seen before. The strange part was that the door was not old and dusty like the rest of the castle. It was clean, smooth, and looked as if it had been built yesterday. He asked the guards who placed it there and no one could answer. He asked the builders, the caretakers, the oldest servants, but none of them had touched that wall. Every time he passed it, he felt a cold breath behind it, almost like someone was standing on the other side with their face pressed to the wood. He swore he could hear faint breathing, slow and steady. The guards said they heard nothing. So once again he felt alone with the unknown. One night, when rain struck the castle like 1,000 tiny stones, the king had a dream. In the dream he saw the death of every king before him. They all died the same way, on the same floor, with the same final expression. Their eyes were always open wide, not from fear of what they saw, but from the shock of who they saw. And in that dream he saw himself lying in the same place, with his crown fallen beside him and the same terrible truth frozen on his face. He awoke shaking and soaked in sweat, unable to tell if the dream had come from his own fear or from something whispering inside his mind. He finally decided to open the door that was not supposed to exist. He waited until sunrise so he would have light, but the light did not help. When he touched the handle, the metal felt warm like skin. When he opened it, the door did not creak like an old hinge. It opened smoothly and silently. Behind it was a hallway that led deep into darkness. The smell was strange. It was old, wet, and heavy with something he could not name. He ordered torches to be lit. The guards followed him, but the deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Soon the torches flickered weakly, as if the darkness did not want to be chased away. The floor beneath them felt uneven and soft in places, like something had been buried beneath it. When they reached the end, they found a door just like the first one, but this one was slightly open, as if someone had entered moments before. When the king pushed it open, the room on the other side stole his breath. It was filled with portraits of every king before him, painted in the same pose, painted with the same strange angle, painted as if the artist already knew how they would die. But the worst part was that each portrait had a twin version next to it, showing the king not as he had lived, but as he had died. And in the center of the room was a new blank canvas, waiting for him. A chair stood before it, and on the chair was a brush already dipped in dark paint. The king froze. The guards behind him whispered prayers. In that moment he finally understood something terrible. The curse was not a simple accident or a repeating fate. The curse was a design. A work in progress. A story being painted, king after king, by a hand that never died. The king ran from the room and ordered it sealed forever, but he could not block the images from his mind. Every corridor reminded him of the twisted portraits. Every shadow reminded him of the unseen painter. Every night he dreamed of the same ending. Soon the fear began to change him. He stopped speaking to his council. He stopped walking the halls. He stopped eating. He spent hours staring at the walls, listening to the scratching sounds that had returned, louder than ever. His servants said he no longer looked like himself. They said he looked like a man who was already halfway gone. The end came on a night with no moon. The guards found him in the exact place where all the kings before him had died. His eyes were open wide, staring at something that was no longer there. His hand was reaching forward as if trying to stop someone from coming closer. And the most chilling thing was the expression on his face. It was not fear. It was recognition, as if the last thing he saw was someone he knew too well. The sealed room was opened after his death, and inside it, the blank canvas was no longer blank. It now held a perfect portrait of the king in death, painted in dark strokes that dripped down the frame like fresh blood. No one found the painter. No one found the brush. No one found the door he had opened. Everything had changed again. The curse had added another chapter, another portrait, another soul. And the castle remained silent, waiting for the next king to try and fail to change the ending. On the night of February 2nd, 2019, dozens of people across the nearby towns felt the earth vibrate not like an earthquake, but like a giant inhaling sharply. Dogs howled. Lights flickered. Temperature dropped instantly. And then it happened. A slow exhale. The ground didn't shake. It sighed. Children cried, saying they heard voices coming from the soil. Adults claimed they saw fog rise not from the air, but from cracks in the ground. One witness said, "It felt like something below us finally woke up." For the first time in centuries. The dead light was seen again, faint but visible, glowing beneath the landslide debris, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. In 2021, a 92-year-old woman named Mara Vailborn was found wandering near the mountains at dusk. She claimed she knew the second face curse because she had seen it before. But when asked when, she replied, In 50 years. Doctors assumed dementia, but Mara insisted time in the mirror world did not move correctly. She said the doubles were patient, watching, learning, slowly preparing to cross fully. Her final words before passing away were, "They practice with shadows first. Then echoes. Then reflections. When they know how to walk in our world without delay. That is when they come." She died with a strange expression, relief mixed with terror. As if she had seen a version of the future she did not want to witness twice. Late in 2023, hikers saw a pillar of white shimmering light rising from beneath the earth. The dead light. Brighter than ever. Not a tear this time. But an opening. The ground vibrated like a drum. Fog swirled upward in spirals. And then the echoes began. Every sound in the valley repeated twice. Footsteps doubled. Voices delayed. Breaths copied a moment later. Even the wind whispered after itself. A ranger watching from a distance claimed. There were figures standing in that light. They were not walking toward us yet. But they were facing us. He resigned the next day. He refused to say anything more.